prevent children being adopted by loving couples who would give them a good home. If that is happening, we should stop it.
The Conservatives have now confirmed that one of their election pledges will be to bring in national guidelines on adoption. The task of assessing couples' suitability will be passed on to voluntary organisations or perhaps to an independent privatised agency.
Local authorities' children's departments have failed all too often. We would like to see them replaced by charitable organisations like the NSPCC and by Dr. Bernardo's, who've got experience of dealing with children, who've never been infiltrated by these madcap ideas which have affected far too many local authorities.
But those who run social services insist the vast majority of adoptions are a success and warn against any political move to cut their powers.
Social workers in local authorities take a lot of time, put a lot of skilled knowledge into assessing adoptive parents and choosing the right parents for the particular child. If you hive it off to a private agency, I'm not sure what that's going to add.
And opposition parties are opposed to any idea of taking adoption away from local councils.
It fills me with horror to think that the Conservatives are thinking of the privatisation of the adoption service. Children are not a commodity. This should not be privatised.
Well, I'm fairly concerned about setting up a quango for adoption. I'm not sure that that's going to be truly accountable, and when we are dealing with the lives of young people, we have to make sure that we know exactly what is going on.
If the adoption services were hived off from local authorities, the Conservatives think it might help meet some of the pent-up demand from couples anxious to adopt. But some of the government's previous initiatives, like the Child Support Agency, have proved highly controversial, and making adoption an election issue could be fraught with danger. Nicholas Jones, BBC News, Westminster.
International observers say the Serbian opposition did win the local elections, which were annulled by the authorities in Belgrade. They've called on Serbia's President Milosevic to respect the will of the people. In Belgrade, heavily armed riot police have been on the streets in force for a second day. From there, Ben Brown reports.
The gloves are off. For the second day running, Serbian riot police have prevented the opposition from demonstrating freely and instead confined them to a small section of Belgrade city centre. For their part, the protesters mock the riot police, pretending to be their prisoners. This is not a free country, they say, but a dictatorship. And the man in charge, Slobodan Milosevic, they are determined to overthrow sooner or later. The opposition were jubilant today when news came through that international monitors had ruled in their favour, agreeing with their claim that Mr. Milosevic has robbed and cheated them of a series of recent local election victories.
The protest leaders are preaching a message of non-violent resistance to President Milosevic, but in truth they have little choice, because if it did come to the crunch, they would be no match for his riot police.
The president has a small army out on the streets of Belgrade, equipped with truncheons and tear gas. They are an intimidating sight. And tonight they went into battle against unarmed demonstrators, attacking them apparently at random. They set upon foreign journalists as well, including this photographer. The Serbian authorities clearly don't enjoy having the eyes of the world gazing at them. The injured were taken to hospital, among them one protester beaten unconscious and a woman and her 12-year-old daughter caught up in the skirmishes. To back up his uniformed police, Mr. Milosevic has more officers out and about in plain clothes. They also beat up anyone they don't like the look of. The opposition here have warned this confrontation could end in civil war. For now, the violence is only sporadic, but it's a crisis that is escalating, and tomorrow sees the funeral of the first protester to die. Ben Brown, BBC News, Belgrade.
The family of one of the British nurses accused of murder in Saudi Arabia say they're convinced of her innocence and will fight to clear her name. Lucy McLaughlin's relatives say she wouldn't hurt anyone. Tonight, the Foreign Office said diplomats would be visiting the two nurses charged with killing a colleague, as Paul Newman reports.
Lucy McLaughlin's parents and her brother insisted today that she was innocent of murder. Her mother and father were too distressed to speak at a news conference in Dundee, but John McLaughlin read out a statement on behalf of the family.
As you can imagine, The last few days have been absolute hell for my family. We have spoken to Lucy very briefly on the telephone, and she has assured us of her innocence. We are obviously worried sick about her situation and are making efforts to secure the very best legal representation for Lucy. Lucy lived for nursing and has spent all her working life caring for others. Anyone who knows her knows that she is not capable of hurting anyone.
Lucy McLaughlin, who's 31, has been held for a week at a police station near the military hospital in Dhahran where she worked. She and another nurse, Deborah Parry, have been charged with murdering 55-year-old Yvonne Guilford, who was stabbed, hit with a hammer and asphyxiated. It could be many months before the matter is tried in a Saudi court, and British lawyers believe independent observers should be present.
There is room for doubt in the case of Saudi Arabia because it does have a record of pretty harsh treatment of political opponents. Now, these women, of course, are not political opponents of the regime, but where there is any reason for concern or doubt, it's always a good thing to have international observers who can simply go and observe and just report on what happened.
A Saudi-owned daily newspaper based in London has reported that the nurses have confessed to the killing. It says if their plea of manslaughter is accepted, they're likely to escape a public beheading.
If it is a premeditated killing, then they would have to face a capital punishment. If it is manslaughter, I think it is different, and it would depend on what the family of the victim would, if they press charges or not. And if they don't press charges, I think it would be, a sentence, a prison sentence, not more than that.
Tonight, the Foreign Office described newspaper claims of a confession as speculation. Consular officials in Saudi Arabia are expected to visit the two accused nurses once again over the weekend. Paul Newman, BBC News at the Foreign Office.
Vandals have caused nearly £1 million worth of damage to a fleet of buses in Bolton. More than 40 vehicles were wrecked over the Christmas period at two depots in the town. Police believe that two buses were started up and used to ram the others. Since privatisation, local competition has been intense, but whether these attacks were premeditated or random acts of vandalism remains unclear. Stores across Britain say they've had near-record crowds for the first day of the winter sales. They're expecting to take several £1 billion over the next few days. But in London, the snow kept the customary queues away from Oxford Street.
On sunny Tyneside, it wasn't the snow that was holding them up, it was the thirst for a bargain. Shops in the Metro Centre, Europe's largest covered complex, started trading from 8:30 this morning. By the end of the day, over 140,000 people had passed through its doors. Some shops needed help staggering their customers. But in Oxford Street in central London, it was a different story. Unexpected snow deterred die-hard shoppers from forming the traditional queues. Despite the slow start, business picked up, with the major department stores reporting healthy trading.
Looking at the figures as they stand at the moment, we are ahead of last year. And looking at the crowds in the store, that should continue.
The cold weather provided amusement for some, but the first heavy snowfall of the season in the south brought a string of delays and accidents on the roads. In South Wales, police recovered the body of a man in a frozen pond near Merthyr Tydfil. It's thought that 52-year-old Tony Rees was trying to help his pet dog.
Mr. Rees went in to effect the rescue, and being a non-swimmer, and the temperature of the water, it just seems as though he drowned, and it's a terrible tragedy.
Tonight, motoring organisations are telling drivers to take care on the roads. Although no major snowfall is forecast, they say ice could make conditions slippery and treacherous. Rita Chakrabarti, BBC News.
Tens of thousands of workers have been demonstrating in South Korea on the second day of the country's first ever general strike. Despite threats of a police crackdown, the strikers have brought much of the country's industry to a standstill. The protest is against a new law that allows firms to lay off workers and to introduce more flexible hours. Asia correspondent Matt Fry reports from the capital Seoul on the strike and its causes.
South Korea, one of Asia's most successful economies, is getting a bitter dose of reality. This is the country's first ever general strike. Tens of thousands of workers abandoned their shipyards, car assembly plants and hospitals to march against a new labour law that allows industries to lay off staff and introduce flexible hours. A necessary medicine long accepted in most industrialised countries, but a terrifying novelty to South Korea's pampered workforce. So controversial was the law that the government had to sneak it through after a marathon session in Parliament late at night when many of the opposition deputies were taking a nap. The stealth tactics are a far cry from the swaggering confidence of 2 years ago when the industrial giant Samsung made so much money it hosted its own company Olympics. The party was a spectacular celebration of the Asian work ethic where jobs are for life and where the firm is family. But a dramatic fall in the price of electronics goods, South Korea's main export, has changed all that.
The roar of South Korea's tiger economy has become decidedly muffled. The country can no longer take the luxuries of full employment and miraculous growth rates for granted. Rapidly rising wages and falling exports have seen to that. This country, like many other Asian success stories, is about to get a taste of the European disease.
The joint spectres of mass redundancies and permanent unemployment are creeping up on South Korea. Mr. Kim on the left works in insurance and earns about £35,000 a year. He's never had it so good, but he fears the worst.
At the office, the corridors are full of people worrying about layoffs. We know the employers want to axe jobs and we resent that. In Korea, losing a job means losing your status in society and in the family.
The government is now asking workers to change the very mentality which created their past successes. But with the economy still growing at an expected 6%, most people are neither in the mood for sacrifice nor prepared to heed the warnings of poverty. Matt Fry, BBC News, Seoul.
Here, doctors in Gateshead say the newborn baby girl found abandoned yesterday is doing well in hospital and that her condition is improving. The baby, whom hospital staff have named Molly, was found behind a hedge in freezing conditions. Police have renewed calls for the mother to come forward, as she may need medical attention. Buckingham Palace has complained to the Advertising Standards Authority about an advertisement featuring Diana, Princess of Wales. The advertisement, for a satirical magazine, shows Diana apparently wearing leather clothes and carrying a whip. One of the country's biggest building societies, the Nationwide, has predicted that house prices will rise next year by 7%. The forecast matches a similar one from the Abbey National. A French yachtsman taking part in a single-handed round-the-world race is recovering after being rescued from the sea by a British fellow competitor. They're now heading for the Tasmanian capital, Hobart. The Frenchman had to abandon ship more than 1,000 miles south of Perth in Australia after his boat began to sink in heavy seas.
A tiny speck in the ocean, Raphael Dinelli could only wave frantically for help as he stood on the upturned hull of his yacht, the vessel slowly sinking into the freezing water. Dinelli sent up a distress beacon after fierce waves had crippled the yacht more than 1,000 miles south of Western Australia. An Australian Air Force team finally spotted him after an 18-hour search. They dropped a raft, radio and food, but it was fellow round-the-world yachtsman Pete Goss who eventually brought him to safety. Guided by an Air Force rescue team, Goss sailed through the night to find Dinelli.
He was standing up at the doorway of the life raft and waving as we went past. So he really was very lucky because I suppose it was just luck that the rescue happened to be so close.
Goss, seen here preparing for the race, has faxed officials saying his competitor Dinelli is suffering from mild hypothermia but is otherwise unharmed. The two men are now heading to Hobart in Tasmania, so Goss can continue competing in the race. The original field has been whittled down from 14 to 10 yachts. Officials say Goss will be compensated for the time spent saving Dinelli, who, they claim, wasn't supposed to be in the competition. He'd been barred before the start for being too inexperienced. He decided to chance it anyway, a gamble which clearly didn't pay off. Jackie Long, BBC News.
Here, police and bailiffs have evicted anti-road protesters from one of 3 camps along the route of the A30 near Exeter. Opponents of a £65 million road improvement scheme have been living in trees and tunnels at the site at Alecombe for the past 2 years.
The road protesters at Alecombe spent more than 2 years building their defences against the A30 improvement scheme. It took contractors just minutes to tear them down after bailiffs and police mounted a surprise operation at daybreak. Only 5 protesters were found on the site, but they were all asleep after the Christmas festivities.
we're not really that surprised, really. It's the ideal time to do it, isn't it? Loads of people are home visiting their families, and you know, everything was really quiet, and you know, and they could just like nip in early in the morning and do it.
A network of tunnels which had been built at the Alicum site were destroyed to stop demonstrators trying to get underground. Protesters were also criticised for not taking care of the camp and leaving it like a waste dump. Bailiffs still have 2 more camps to clear, but they've now lost the element of surprise, and it's recognised that the operation will require more manpower because the sites are bigger and better prepared.
Yeah, we won't have any problem with them. It'll take us longer though, but I've got specialist contractors who are first class at climbing trees and going down tunnels and everything else.
The protesters claim the road will destroy ancient trees as well as damage the beauty of the Devon countryside. But many local residents support the scheme. Stephen Cape, BBC News, Devon.
Many motorcyclists are angry about a new law that could force them off the road. Regulations being introduced on New Year's Day mean that car drivers who use their licences to ride small motorcycles with L plates must now complete a compulsory training course. The Motorcycle Trainers Association say they haven't been given enough time to comply with the new law. But the government agency responsible says it has no power to postpone the changes. The Peruvian government has declared an official state of emergency as the hostage crisis at the Japanese ambassador's residence heads towards its 11th day. And the world's leading industrial countries have backed Peru's hardline stance. In a joint statement, they demanded the immediate release of all the hostages and ruled out making any concessions to the guerrillas. From the Peruvian capital Lima, Alan Little reports.
It has settled into a predictable routine. Every day the Red Cross takes in food and water and takes out mobile toilets, removes the rubbish from the garden and, by so doing, keeps the siege manageable, gives it longevity. All around, neighbours living in adjoining streets carry on with their lives. The siege has become part of the landscape. Here now, nerves are frayed not by tension, but by boredom. Around the clock, the world watches, but there's little to see. The twitch of a curtain viewed through a long-distance lens only hints at the activity inside. Peru's Congress reconvened in sombre and uncompromising mood. 12 of its members are hostages. Their names were read out. The opposition has closed ranks in solidarity with the government, which is not budging from its staunchly anti-terrorist position. On the contrary.
The state of emergency suspends normal civil rights and imposes what amounts to martial law in Lima. It restricts freedom of movement and allows for arrests without warrant and house searches. President Fujimori is acting now with the explicit approval of the Western world. The G7 nations issued a joint statement expressing their solidarity with his anti-terrorist strategy and reaffirming the principle that no concessions should be made to terrorists. President Fujimori's message to the rebels is clear. It is they who must compromise because the government will not. Alan Little, BBC News, Lima.
Scientists at Bradford University are on the verge of a breakthrough in understanding one of the great remaining mysteries of space, the nature and origin of starbursts. These sudden explosions of high-energy radiation sometimes last just a few seconds. Now a telescope on the Yorkshire moors has been enhanced to capture their short life. This report from our North of England correspondent Mike Mackay.
It's already one of the smartest telescopes in the business. A £200,000 robotic machine that only comes out to scan the sky when it's done its own weather check. What's also unique about it is that it's available on the internet, literally from anywhere on Earth.
There are more than 35,000 registered users of the telescope around the world, and each week between them they make at least 120,000 hits or calls upon its service, and the demand is growing.
Developed at Bradford University, the telescope is linked by computers to a NASA satellite. For 25 years, the satellite's been detecting gamma bursts, brief, distant explosions of high-energy radiation which leave no visible trace. Now, the scientists are about to upgrade their telescope to produce a 4 times bigger picture of the sky.
What we're doing is putting a piggyback camera on our telescope, which has the same field of view that the satellite has in space, and that looks for this star that's varying very rapidly that we can associate with the gamma burster, and it moves the main telescope then to look at that star.
It's a prospect exciting astronomers around the world, not least in America. No gamma burst has ever been caught in a visual image, No one knows if they come from the edge of our galaxy or the edge of the universe.
The idea of having a telescope that can respond on very short notice, as this one can, to the satellite signal that says, ah yes, I've seen one of these bursts, and within 30 seconds to spin around in the sky and point at that direction in the sky to see if there's any afterglow in the optical part of the spectrum, is a goal that a number of groups around the world have been working towards for quite a while.
Back in Bradford, John Baruch believes 1997 could be the year the mystery of gamma bursts is finally unravelled. And if it is, thousands of enthusiasts on the internet will share in the secret. Mike Mackay, BBC News, West Yorkshire.
The European Parliament has called for an investigation into safety standards on German building sites, following a number of fatal accidents involving British and other foreign workers. More than 100,000 British and Irish labourers are believed to be working in Germany. Our Europe business correspondent Jonathan Charles reports from Berlin.
A diver braves the icy waters, examining the flooded foundations of a Berlin building site. Eastern Germany is undergoing a dramatic facelift after years of communist neglect. There's so much work that British labourers have flocked here by the thousands. But now it's alleged that safety rules may be being breached in the rush to get the job completed. Denise Stacey's husband died in a site accident. She believes many other foreign workers in Germany are at risk. Len Stacey fell 28 feet from a roof he was working on. There was no safety rail to protect him, as German law requires.
For me, it started out as a personal issue, the death of my husband. But the things I've heard since the death of my husband, and I've heard, what is happening to other workers over there, foreign nationals, I'm horrified.
As German building inspectors tour a central Berlin site, they find plenty of evidence the regulations are being flouted. One of them points out inadequate safety railing, just the sort of failure which led to Len Stacey's death.
Do you want small boards? Yeah.
Elsewhere on the site, British plasterers were discovered balancing on boards which weren't strong enough to hold their weight. The inspectors are determined to be vigilant.
Der Unternehmer wird durch uns angeschrieben.
Inspector Peter Lehniger says companies which ignore safety standards will be fined heavily.
Auch noch nicht funktioniert.
But the authorities are under pressure to be tougher still. There are just too many building sites for policing to be effective. But now members of the European Parliament are demanding a full investigation into safety standards. They've been told that as many as 5 foreign workers die every week in construction accidents here. Hundreds more are injured. Relaxing in a Berlin pub, British builders admit many accidents occur because they're tired. They often work 12-hour days, willing to compromise safety for earnings of £1,000 a week. More restrictions on working time might prevent injury, according to Germany.
Den Arbeitsschutz kontrolliert und koordiniert.
Building union leader Klaus Pankow says a maximum 10-hour day would do much to cut the accident rate.
Dann steigen die Risiken zu sehr.
The German building industry knows it's under severe scrutiny. More measures may now be implemented to prove that safety is being taken seriously. Jonathan Charles, BBC News, Berlin.
Zimbabwe's cricketers are in a strong position after 2 days of the second and final test in Harare. England were bowled out for 156 in their first innings, and Zimbabwe had reached 93 for 2 in reply when rain stopped play.
England's miserable performance on the first day had been no laughing matter, but perhaps there was some small crumb of comfort to be gained as John Crawley and Philip Tufnell edged the total past 150 this morning. But when Tufnell was somewhat unfortunately bowled off his body by Heath Streak, England's score of 156 still seemed woefully inadequate. The start of Zimbabwe's reply offered some encouragement to England when Mark Decker was caught behind off Alan Mullally with a score on just 5. But the Zimbabwean captain Alistair Campbell joined Grant Flower, and the second wicket pair began to put England's total in perspective. But boundaries like this were rare. Only 17 runs came in 2 hours between lunch and tea, and the persistence of the England bowlers was rewarded when Craig White claimed the wicket of Campbell with the score on 46. But Zimbabwe weren't about to bat as badly as England had done, and their vastly experienced coach David Houghton coped with the desperately slow outfield by taking the aerial route to the boundary. At the other end, Grant Flower survived 2 confident English appeals, the second for a catch off Robert Croft, but this once again was Zimbabwe's day. They trail by only 63 runs, and in these conditions, even a modest first innings lead might well be decisive.
Rain prevented all but 4 balls after tea today. England might well need more help from the weather to avoid a humiliating defeat in this test and series. Duncan Jones, BBC News.
And the main news again tonight, the Prime Minister has ordered a review of the adoption policy to make it easier for children to be adopted and reduce the number in care. International observers say the local elections in Belgrade were rigged by the Serbian government. They've urged the president to reverse his decision to annul the results. That's all from the 9 o'clock news. Good night.
Good evening. It's been one of the busiest shopping days of the year with the Christmas sales up and running. Our cities have been heaving, but for many bargain hunters it could mean an unhappy new year. A survey out today shows 1 in 5 shoppers will end up more in debt.
The shopping frenzy has begun. Only 3 days since the end of the Christmas rush, now the shops are packed again. But the bargain hunters could be buying into trouble. A Maury poll says 1 in 5 shoppers will leave the sales with debt problems.
First temptation's there, and people are buying so quickly that just people follow, I think.
I mean, there's so many shops out there anyway. I mean, you're just spoilt for choice. And yes, I'll be doing plenty more shopping later.
Well, I think you can go mad for it, yeah, you know, especially after Christmas.
So some savings come at a price. Experts reckon thinking about what you want before you set off could save worries in the new year.
A prisoner has been found dead at Lincoln Jail. Paul Riley was discovered hanged in the prisoners' hospital wing on Christmas Eve. The 44-year-old from Ollerton in Nottinghamshire was on remand. There aren't thought to be any suspicious circumstances. There have been claims black voluntary groups in the East Midlands are being deliberately set up to fail. The Racial Equality Council in Nottingham says they're being set unrealistic targets which are forcing them to close. But the people who fund them say that's not the case.
The Racial Equality Council in Nottingham says over the past 9 years, around 9 voluntary groups have closed. It's concerned a pattern has emerged, where black organisations are deliberately set up to fail. The REC says that they are not given enough time to reach the objectives set, and the targets are often unrealistic.
3 things. 1, they need more time to develop. 2, they need better training. And 3, they should not have over expectations of those groups which they would not have of other groups.
Nottingham City Council, which funds a number of black groups in the city, says the REC is wrong. It questions the claim and asks why it should put time, effort and money into groups only to see them fail.
Workmen have spent the day cleaning up a landslide that destroyed part of Nottingham Castle. A burst water main caused 80 tons of rock to fall onto a road. Part of the path disintegrated, but council inspectors have assessed the surrounding rock and are confident the area is safe. Streets nearby have now been reopened. Many teachers in the East Midlands are taking early retirement because of stress. Figures from the National Association of Head Teachers show only 19% of teachers stay on to retirement age. To try to stop the trend, the government is proposing pensions should be paid by local councils. But unions fear that'll just encourage more teachers to leave their jobs even sooner. A man's been injured after falling into a coal hopper. The accident happened at the George Fisher foundry in North Hykeham near Lincoln. Workers and fire crews eventually pulled the man free. That's about it from the late team. Do join us for Saturday News and Sport tomorrow afternoon. But for now, have a relaxing weekend. Michael Fish has the weather.
Good evening to you. No end in sight to the cold snap. In fact, it may well get worse before it gets better. And we're not alone. Just look at this. Some of these temperatures earlier on today. Record low temperatures, in fact, near to Warsaw. Below freezing, even close to the Costa del Sol. Right the way down across Italy, where it was snowing. And it's been snowing there for most of the day. And we're going to keep these cold easterly winds throughout the foreseeable future. In fact, that biting wind picking up early next week when we might get some snow with it as well. But, of course, that's a long way off. Now, at the moment, we've got some cloud feeding across in from the east. It started off very icy in some parts of the country, so do watch out. But as that cloud comes across, so temperatures will rise for a while, and then clearing skies following again, and the temperature going down. And it's already clear skies and below freezing in many western areas. So temperatures up and down like a yo-yo, but the main theme is that eventually we're all going to have a frost, so do watch. As I said, there will be some slippery patches around. Tomorrow we start off in many southern parts, rather on the cloudy side, just here and there, as there will be tonight. The odd sort of flake of snow or light bit of rain and sleet, but that'll soon move away and die out. The cloud will break. And for much of the day, for much of the country, it's going to be dry and bright. Some weak winter sunshine, best in that northwestern area. Just a chance of the odd light snow flurry near to that east coast, but most areas really staying dry. That wind is going to be picking up again, though. We've had it before, and that cold wind, raw wind coming in from the east or the northeast, making it feel particularly bitterly cold, I think, eventually across the southeastern corner of the country. Well, if anything, actually the temperatures might go down as the day wears on, and it's not really going to be brilliant temperature-wise anywhere tomorrow. And then a sharp frost countrywide tomorrow night, and then we start off with a reasonably bright day on Sunday with some sunshine. Already some wintry showers near to that eastern coast, and they're going to spread further and further south and west, I think, as the day goes along, and more of those showers turning to sleet or snow, but western and southern parts staying fine and dry. Then the wintry theme continues into Monday. By that time, many eastern areas having some sleet or snow showers, the more western parts staying fine and dry. That's all from me. A very good evening.
You better believe it, this man's got a price on his head. Way out west, Richard Wilson, with a little help from his friends.
Honest, hard-working cowboy for ranch in Wyoming.
I can ride a little bit.
You're doing great, Richard.
Practice makes a cowboy. Can Richard Wilson make his mark? Back at the ranch, way out west, Sunday at 9 on BBC One.
The award-winning Fast Show continues BBC Two's Friday night comedy in just over 5 minutes with a Christmas special.
A writer of magic.
You don't look at all like C.S. Lewis.
An American poet.
Who is Mrs. Gresham? Oh, she's just a friend.
A meeting of minds.
You've arranged a life for yourself where no one can touch you.
Which grew into love.
I want to marry you, Joy.
A passion which changed their destinies forever.
I don't want to lose you.
I don't want to be lost.
Anthony Hopkins and Deborah Winger star in Shadowlands.
Thank you, my love.
New Year's Eve at 8 o'clock on BBC One.
Based on John Grisham's best-selling legal thriller, tonight's network film premiere now on BBC One stars Tom Cruise as a fledgling lawyer who discovers that a job for life means just that when he joins the firm.